welcome to this episode of Finding Serenity. Tonight, we are going to talk about denial, and it's known, right? It's like a defense mechanism. And
Yeah.
so, can you just explain like what a defense mechanism is and maybe how denial falls into that? And then we'll talk at some of the nuances maybe of denial, how it shows up, how to combat it, right?
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I think that, defense mechanisms are typically a Freudian term, right? But they also defense mechanisms are mechanisms that we use to help us cope with high levels of anxiety and high levels of emotional pain. And so people use denial oftentimes, and sometimes it's really effective. It's an effective coping mechanism. And sometimes people need denial, and sometimes it's the best strategy in an impossible situation so that you can continue to keep functioning. However, the reason I really wanted to talk about denial is because in my work, where I'm working with kids in foster care, and many of them are coming from situations from families that revolve around the disease of addiction. Denial is a huge problem, and let me just give you a couple of examples. So let's say, when they remove a child and they put a child in foster care, or let's say they place a child with a family member, and the family member, let's say it's like a grandmother to an adult mom who has a problem with addiction. And so then they put the children with the grandmother and this happens so often. I might be interviewing the grandparent, and I always interview the parent first, the caregiver first, and the grandparent is telling me how great this kid is. And I will ask, "Well, how do you think the disease of addiction has impacted your grandchild?" Like, my grandkid is doing so well, there has been no impact. And I'm like, that is fantastic. Even though in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I hope that's the case, although it's very unlikely. So then when I interview the kid is telling me about how depressed they are, how they, tried to get their parent to stop drinking, and how invalidated they felt when their parent didn't listen to their pleas to get them to stop drinking, and when their parent was acting erratically, and let's say their mom was exposed repeatedly to domestic violence, how that impacted them. And the impact was severe. But when I talk to the grandparent, and the grandparent is like, my kid is great, that blocks the grandparent's ability to not only get the right care for the child, because they think the kid doesn't have any problem, but it also is more gaslighting, because you have a child who is in so much pain because of the situation that they were being raised in. And then the caregiver is like, everything is, glory perfect, and totally denies that child's reality, which only exacerbates the child's loneliness and insecurities regarding their own thinking, because they are like, well, is everything okay? I feel so miserable, but my grandma is saying everything is okay. And so in these situations, this is where denial is very destructive.
Yeah, that's a great example, and it's just so sad I love that you brought I was thinking the term gaslighting because the grandparents' denial keeps them safe, and then the kid is like, "Wait, reality is being denied," without really knowing it, and so there's this awful ripple effect on how adults denial then is gonna just completely twist this little baby brain,
Completely.
what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I'm observing, what I'm experiencing. And
It
then it also
really start developing self-esteem. I mean, it really, because when your reality is denied, you begin to internalize that, and you feel like you are wrong all the time, and I think that is really, it's very damaging to a child's developing esteem and sense
yeah,
of self.
and we talk about like, people do whatever it is to feel safe and it's not necessarily conscious. So the grandparents trying to practice safety from whatever reality in denial. And then kids, whatever we do. And like some of the ways to feel safe, if I'm not getting seen, let me go act out. Right. And then they get diagnosed with, ADHD or all this other BS when it's really trauma, denial, all this other garbage that the adults in their lives are kind of perpetuating. I hear all these acronyms, and the one that I hear all the time for denial is what don't even notice I am lying.
My gosh, that is great. I have to write.
And it hurts, and so other, other ones we talked about projection one week. There's like all sorts of different denial, but they all kind of have some pretty similar functions, right? And like you said, they can be really life saving at times. But I think, we hear denial and in like kind of the addiction context, like there's all the 20 questions, and people kind of brand themselves addiction counselors or psychiatrists, and they'll go to someone and say, I think you have a drinking problem. And then they all say, no, I don't. And then they're like, ding, 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 denial. And that's garbage. The way I think it shows up, sure, I don't have a problem. But the way addiction works is the horrific has become normal. And it does, like the grandparents in your example. I work with people new in recovery and it's like, if they're even able, everyone in the world can see a lot of the damage they've done to themselves and other people. Well, let's just start with other people. It was like, they might be like, oh, yeah, I got relationship stressors, or I got a DUI. And it's like to try to look deeper than that. That's where denial saves them. I think if people really knew how much they were hurting themselves and other people, they'd shoot themselves or change, But it's just the horrifics become normal. And to be able to tolerate what I've really done for people or to people and to myself. And I think this idea of normalized dysfunction, the horrific becoming normal, I'm used to screaming at people. So there's no way I'm ever going to see that my belief systems are corrupted, that it's okay for me to yell at you, like, all this crap. And the thing like, yeah, my kids are too young, or they haven't really been impacted. And we have all these belief systems too that we're unaware of. Well, I put food on the table, therefore you shouldn't blank. And it's like, I've never been married, but I don't think people take wedding vows that are like, I'm going to stay drunk and don't give me any lip because I put food on the table. And the thing with addiction, I firmly believe it's in the survival part of our brain. And so that's why everybody's a threat. So I have to deny it's a problem. I have to attack, deflect, blame, all this shit, which is really about denial. And
Yeah, I think
most
it's interesting. I think that the addict, as well as all the people around the addict, have denial. I mean, like, denial is at the root of the disease of both the addict and the person, the Al-Anon person, the person who is struggling with codependency. I mean, it's really something how huge the denial issue is with
It
this
really
disease.
is, and that's why and I think we might have talked about it a little bit. So much of what I've shared has just been either told to me and I've had an experience with it or whatever, but, it really blew my mind to be told, like, it's not just a disease of denial, it's a disease of ignorance, meaning unawareness.
Well,
And
tell me what you mean by that.
So, my example, the one I like to give is, I got 70 different, that's an exaggeration, 4 different mental health diagnoses. And I've had a problem with drugs and alcohol since I started as a kid. And I think my problem is anxiety and depression. I go to treatment once, I'm just to get out of trouble, don't follow any of the directions, whatever, and then end up in the psych ward for 6 weeks, suicidal, overdosing on like Seroquel and a blackout. And I'm like, no, my problem is anxiety and depression. And then keep doing this and racking up mental health diagnoses, go to treatment again. And I'm like, no, I'm depressed and anxious. That's my problem, not addiction. And they're like, and I walk out. And then I go back to treatment years later singing the same song. And I'm like, well, you're keeping me on the Lamictal and you're keeping me on all this, that's my problem. And so I couldn't understand that for addiction, what I believe the specific nature of the problem is I got a mind that can't leave the drug or alcohol alone, a body that can't take it. On my own, I can't do shit about it. I've lost the power of choice as to if, when, how much, how long I use, and what happens as a result, like the consequence.
Interesting.
But there's no way I want to fucking face that because that means drink number one's the problem. And I have enough evidence that when I don't have drugs and alcohol, life's awful. It's fucking awful. But I saw a movie when I was like 9 years old with my buddy Chris, some black and white movie about some dumb alcoholic, right? We thought it was hysterical. He's seeing pink elephants. And so for the next 30 years, I think that's what withdrawal is psychotic hallucinations, pink elephants. And so this denial is firm because as long as I have anxiety and depression, I'm self-medicating and I can keep working on that, even though none of this shit's working. My my pills for depression and bipolar don't say do 8 balls of cocaine and drink 2 bottles of gin, compromise your values, take these when you want, take them if you want an immediate fix. They'll fix you right away. So then I get the treatment, and there was like 3 or 4 things about the ignorance. So I'm singing the song. My problem is anxiety and depression. And counselor tells me, look, man, you might have substance induced anxiety and depression. And I'm like, well, what's that? And he's like, well, what kind of drugs do you do? And I'm like, well, I love cocaine. He's like, well, what do you love about it? I'm like, it gives me energy, it removes my shame. It's the only way I get things done. He's like, good. It's an awesome drug. And he's like, you know what happens when you don't have it? I'm like, fuck, I'll bite your head off. I'll sleep for a day, eat enough for 10 people, scream at people, and then go get high again. And I'm like, he's like, that's what withdrawal is. Every drug, once you develop a tolerance, produces certain effects: euphoria, energy, motivation, confidence. And then the opposite happens. You are depressed. It's cocaine induced, and alcohol. Go without that, shakes, tremors, sweats. And now he's not saying pink elephants. And I'm like, shit. So it's called cognitive dissonance, right? I got this fixed idea. I'm anxious and depressed. I'm not a drug addict. I don't have the disease of addiction. And I get this new information. I'm like, fuck you. And then we watched this video on the brain disease of addiction. You know, we're all sitting there dying, paying $30,000 in treatment and, you know, getting upset they don't have good tacos in Minnesota and they don't have banana splits every day. And you keep us too busy or you don't keep us busy enough. And it's this video on the brain disease of addiction. And he's starting to talk about pleasure, reward, dopamine spikes. And then of all the counselors I couldn't stand and all the treatment modalities and BS I hated, the one I hated the most was this counselor wore a big cross. I'm like, and he had a dumb name and a dumb accent from Rhode Island. And he's up there at the fucking auditorium lecturing us on. And he's like, we're going to talk about the mental obsession today. And this fucking guy brings out a puppet. And I'm like,
My God.
I didn't pay $30,000 of fucking hard earned, inherited money to fucking see a puppet show. But he starts talking and he's like, well, this is slick. You know, hey, JD, you know, you're not as bad as Rhonda. You've just done 30 days of treatment. You know, and I'm like, fuck you. But these 3 things combined start to do something dissonance wise in my brain. And I'll finish this story really quick.
Yeah,
I got
I'm
jammed
taking
into
notes.
this family program when I was in treatment. Now, I wouldn't let my family be involved, and it's 1,000 miles away from where I was. And I really thought my counselor was sending me over there too, because I was a model patient for like 2 days. And then I walked into this room and see all these loved ones of like my peers. And I'm like, I felt like a fucking pariah. And somehow I think they put me in there to start to gain some empathy and crack denial. Like this might be what you've done to your girlfriend and your family. But something in there is because I hadn't hurt these family members. They saw me as like this courageous guy fighting addiction and all this stuff. And one of my buddies in treatment, his wife and kids were in the family program with me. And I just thought I'd do them a solid. These kids were cute. They were fucking funny. And I felt awful for them. And so I just kind of took them under my wing. I go play frisbee golf with them, talk to them, BS with them. And they had to watch the fucking puppet show and this movie, and they got all the disease of addiction education. And this girl says to me one day, she's like, you know, JD, do you really, does my dad really have some crazy voice in his head telling him to do all this stuff that hurts him and hurts us, justifies all this stuff? And I would think it's a God I didn't believe in at the time. Instead of giving my stupid rant about dumb puppet shows and all that shit, where I was like, yeah, I think so.
That is heartbreaking.
And that kind of started me on this idea, like maybe the primary problem, the specific nature of your problem, ding dong, ain't anxiety and depression. And that's just a gift. It was a gift of God and grace to drop that. It took 30 years to drop it. And it wasn't easy to drop. That denial is strong and it protects me, allows me to continue to believe therapists who like, you're just self medicating shame, anxiety, and depression. And I'm like, you can keep having my dope money, buddy, because you're not telling me I'm an addict. Thank you. So, yeah. And it's just really hard to get specific. We don't know. And that's
When that child said to you, asking you about her dad, it sounds like you know how in the big I've never read the Blue Book, but I understand that, Bill Williams talks is that's right, that's his name, right? Bill Williams?
Bill Wilson.
Bill Wilson talks about, service really helping people and, like, helping ground you, and, like, that was I mean, her asking you that, even though, I mean, it wasn't like an official act of service, it kind of was an act of service, because she pulled on your heartstrings and you were open and honest with her. But that sounds like it helped you see the light, like how service helps you see, helping somebody else helps you see the light.
All of that. And it's like, no therapists, none of the million treatment centers I went to, none of the million AA meetings I went to, none of it solidified at all until she asked me that question. And what I'm supposed to do is be drunk and not there. What I'm supposed to do is tell her, no, Maddie, this is a bunch of bullshit. And I didn't
But you
say
were
that.
just honest with her.
Yeah. Just so yeah, this little girl was like instrumental.
That's a pretty amazing, like, divine intervention.
100%. And
I mean,
so
it sounds like that's where you, like, that was, like, where your denial broke down and you turned the corner, it sounds like. So,
yeah, to a degree. Now I'm still full of crap and tons of dissonance about that and a million other things, but I think that's
you're gonna have to explain a lot. I think a lot of people don't really know what cognitive dissonance is.
so just in the most simple sense, the way I understand it. Now I'm not a psychiatrist or anything like that, but the way I understand it is I have a fixed idea. Anxiety and depression are my problem. And then I get competing information. These are withdrawal symptoms. What you do in active addiction actually might also be contributing not to your physiological anxiety, but your values compromise, all of this stuff. And so the movie, the girl, the lectures, the books, the puppet show are giving me competing information. And what typically happens with denial, rigid thinking, whatever you want to call it, is most humans will double down on their old idea. No, because it hurts. My brain explodes when it has competing information. I'm not the biggest piece of garbage in the world. Maybe I'm not anxious and depressed. Maybe it is substance induced. Maybe recovery's not the nightmare I make it out to be. And so my head explodes and we don't know what to do with it. And that's why I think service is not necessarily not at all really like, oh, you got a problem, let me help. It's like, listen, ask somebody what they like about music, something to pause and maybe consider stuff. So yeah, we just aren't even aware of our fixed ideas because most of us are right all the time, or it's just been burned into our brain. I'm worthless. I can't get attention unless I'm sexually promiscuous. I can't get attention unless I'm super successful. Isolation is the only form of safety. All this garbage, denying who I truly am, denying the possibility of change. And
Yeah.
yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how I understand it. You have the 2 competing ideas in your head, like, and you kind of are leaning in one direction, and because the competing ideas create so much internal conflict, so much anxiety, you instead of, being open-minded and try to work it and look at both solutions, you grab a hold of the one, it might be the most dysfunctional one, you're not sure, and because grabbing hold of that, identifying with that helps decrease the symptoms of anxiety.
It does, and I've heard this, and I don't know. I mean, it sounds true to me, but as they said, like every human being will trade the pain and misery they know. They will not trade that for pain and misery or the unknown. So this giant safety in denial, this giant safety in the old idea, even though I'm blundering along, even though I don't like the effects of it. Whatever I do to feel safe or get numb or get to feel good, like I'll take that, over this idea. Maybe there's change, like this hard work, identifying my role. I mean, we talk about the bondage of self, and there's just too many people who be like, Jesus, your grandparents are in denial. They get drunk. These people died. No wonder you're a messed up kid. No wonder you like to drink, JD, or whatever. It's just like rather than like, maybe I could actually heal.
I mean, it goes back. I mean, even with that same example with the grandmother and the kids, like it might, like what you said, like it might be so painful for her to deal with the reality of the situation of that her daughter is an addict, and how and her daughter lost her kids to the state, and how maybe she even contributed to her daughter's addiction, possibly. I mean, I know you can't really contribute to another person's addiction, but every parent has dysfunctional parenting styles, and so, maybe because it would, and then, now she's raising her grandchildren, maybe it's too unbearable to realize the damage that was done to her grandchildren. So now she's just holding on to how everything is perfect and wonderful, even though the child may not have acting out problems, especially that, I mean, in that case, maybe makes it easier because the child has internalizing problems like low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and they're not acting out in school and they never have angry outbursts because they don't know how to express their feelings. The grandparent is like, "Oh, everything is perfect," because it's easier for them. But it still is dysfunctional, especially when you're, rearing a child, because it blocks you from validating them, validating their feelings, and getting the right treatment for them. And another thing that it does is that it suggests to the child that their problems, like that they can't cope with their problems, and that everything is okay, and that that the child, that the problems are, by denying them, it's like acting like the problems are so big that they can't handle them versus just validating them and just saying, yes, this is a
So I
problem.
never learned any tools except, yeah, this
Right.
is happening. And
More low self-esteem. I mean, you're the there it actually is reinforcing future addictive behavior, like, this is the beginning of the raising of a child who might struggle with addiction in their adult life.
helplessness for sure. And I think so much of it too is with addiction, like, like Al Anon, most people think like if they ding dong would just quit drinking, everything would be okay. But
Yeah.
so much deeper than that, I don't know if I've shared this example, but working with families, a typical thing that'll happen, and this is going to sound over the top, hyperbolic, but it's not. So let's just say I have a man who's married and he's got a release of information where I can talk to his wife and his mother, and I don't do this as much anymore because of these issues. I want one client, not three, and none of them think they need to be clients. But anyway, what'll happen is I'll call and just try to ask a few open-ended questions of the wife and give some information about maybe Al-Anon and the brain disease of addiction. And his fucking mother did a number on him. Doesn't listen to a word I say. So that call goes great. I hang up the phone and I check the release of information and call mom. And she's like, my little angel was okay till he got with that heathen she devil bitch, And I'm like, first
I
of
know the
all,
story so
you're
well, yeah.
both sick as fuck, excuse me, and your husband's sick, and it's like, whether it was mom, this, Jesus, no Jesus, like, he's got a problem, and so do you, and him getting sober isn't contingent on either one of you changing, and you all dealing with your issues isn't contingent on him getting sober or not, It's just like, people are just like, "No, no, no, there was no alcohol in my house." I'm like, "No one's trying to blame you. No one's trying to do it, but we're just so defended," and that really is this denial that it's just like to get even to consider it takes like so many layers to crack. I might have it. Then I have the dissonance. I'm like, no, he's sober now. Everything's fine. There's this safety in it, that just is like continued dysfunction.
I mean, I can see how it's so hard, with addiction and also with Al-Anon, to get better. It is so hard. I mean, I've been in Al-Anon 8 years. I go all the time to Al-Anon. I do my own individual therapy, and it is freaking hard to get better because of all these issues, and and if you grew up with the disease or with some kind of severe dysfunction and where denial ran rampant in your household, it became a way of life of relating to the world. And so I think it is really hard, and you have to have constant work. In Al-Anon, there's Al-Anon literature, you go to meetings, you go to speaker meetings, you read books. It really takes that. It takes it coming at every single direction to try to get better.
It really does, and I need other people, and so many of my safety mechanisms are like, no, they're bad, or they're know-it-alls, or it's not safe, and, yeah, I think that the healing is like, nothing against therapy, right? But, like, if you came to me and said, "I think I got a problem with denial," or you and I did, like, $20,000 worth of your money's worth of work to finally get you to see you have denial, you're gonna keep seeing me in therapy. I'm gonna be driving a Porsche, right? And, you gotta go try this stuff out, and that's why I like the recovery that has groups. I
Yeah,
don't
me too,
need a
JD, me too.
counselor to get out of denial. It helps, but, like, just talking to someone, listening to people in the meetings, finding out who I truly am, seeing other people share about going through the same crap I have and then, like, literally being like, "I'm not alone." I really thought I was the only one, and
I think that that peer the Al-Anon I don't know about AA, but I think AA is the same way, so just tell me, but our Al-Anon is peer to peer.
yeah,
Everybody's in there sharing their experience, strength, and hope. And sometimes that's a much more powerful intervention than going to. I like both therapy and Al Anon, but sometimes Al Anon can be a more powerful intervention when you hear that grandmother come in and say, I'm overwhelmed raising my daughter's kids. And because of the disease of addiction and the state's involved, now I have all these doctor's appointments I have to go to, and the state's breathing down my neck. You know, and this is not how I saw my adult life going. It's really powerful when someone else says that and you are going through the same thing.
it does, and they say this thing and this is the last thing I wanna share on this, and it's almost impossible in individual therapy to get this. You might get some skills, but you gotta go try them out, but they'll say in recovery this thing like, "Boy, you gotta get rid of your sense of terminal uniqueness," and people say that, they don't know what it means, and I didn't know what the hell it meant, and all it did was reinforce my idea that 12-step recovery, treatment, counselors wanted to turn me into some cliche, slogan-uttering sheep who has to work 9 to 5 and then is in a 12-step meeting and depressed the rest of his life. What
So
the
true.
you
So
know? And I think
yeah,
I've got like a functioning brain. I got shit for brains, like SFB, right? Diagnosable. But what I found out what they really mean is the uniqueness, JD, what you have like every other addict, whether she's turning tricks in Espanola or at the country club getting drunk right now or nodding off on fentanyl on the street is deflection, denial, ignorance, blame. You suck at asking for help. You're full of self-pity. You think you're a control freak. You hate yourself. You judge other people. You hate other people. You fear 'em. And you think you're the only one who's got all this crap going. That's how you're not
it's the same thing with Al-Anon.
recovery is uncovering all this bullshit to become the unique individual we all are, right? People just latch on to these things like it's denial or, oh, this is shame to call it a character defect or you're jamming God down. It's all more deflection to deny I might need to do some work on myself.
I love it. I'm in complete agreement. It's
So
the bondage of freaking self.
it really is.
It's
And
so it's so nasty.
it is, and when we say that, I can't say enough that doesn't mean we're bad, you know?
That's true, JD. Thank you
Either
for
my
bringing that.
wasn't a counselor or anyone pointing out that I was selfish, self-pitying, deflecting, and dishonest was something grace made me do a little work, listen to some people, and then diagnose myself with these things. Then I have a choice. Do I want to keep worrying about everyone else's hypocrisy and judgment and keep thinking I'm the scum of the earth? Or do I want to maybe work on my own hypocrisy and judgment and see what happens? And then freed from the bondage of self, I could pretty much live life and treat people the way I want to be treated because I'm not all wrapped up in defense and defensiveness, defense mechanisms. I'm just here. I'm present.
No. Those defense mechanisms are blinding, blinding. Okay,
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much.
see you next week.
All right.